So we're covering today the sun, and there's many things that could be said about the sun, from representing our identity to our life purpose, um, our conscious mind as well, and our will to live and our creative life force. But the one thing that I once read about the sun and that really has stuck with me since is that the sun is where our soul has decided to shine in this life, in this lifetime. So that's one thought that I always carry with me. James might disagree. And I know that James asked us to look at when push comes to shove, how do we react? How do we find the force, the life force to push through things? So James, if you would like.
I think most of us approached astrology from the point of view of the sun sign. Sun sign astrology is the way in, typically. Even in the daily newspapers, when you read your astrology thing every day, it's based on your sun sign. And that's the only reason that is the case, is because nobody knows their ascendant. The theory behind the daily predictions in the newspaper is really based on the houses. So if you looked up the ascendant in the daily newspapers, you'd be closer to having any reality to those predictions, because it's based on the 12 houses that unfold from the ascendant, but they're pretending that it unfolds from the sun sign in the daily astrology. The point is that we know our sun sign, and so that's what we start learning. And Linda Goodman's sun sign book is surprisingly meaningful. However, when you get to a certain depth of astrology, you start to realize that people don't actually fulfill their sun sign quite as clearly, quite as readily, quite as frequently as we were first led to believe. And you start to understand quite a bit about them by looking at other bits, particularly, of course, the ascendant and the moon sign. And as I mentioned, when I was teaching astrology for a long time, 30 years or something, mostly I used the technique of astrodrama, which is very revealing. And what it revealed to me more than anything else was people were worse at acting out their own sun sign. That was the most difficult thing for anyone to do. That was a really interesting observation. And so I looked a bit deeper and I found that whereas there is meaning in the sun sign, of course there is, it's actually most clearly observed when push comes to shove, by which I mean a little bit of force just isn't enough. You have to make your point, and whether or not you're forcing yourself an extrovert way into the world and a bit of push won't do, you have to shove your way in, or whether someone's shoving you, pushing you, and you have to shove back, or you will lose your sense of essence being. You lose your identity unless you say enough. So it's in those kind of situations where you need extra vitality. Now, if you think about situations in life, we kind of drift along trying to find the route of least resistance. Whatever's easiest, we tend to do that. Well, that's the moon, very likely, that makes us a bit lazy, typically. I mean, there are some exceptions. I would say the moon in Aries would not ever be considered lazy by anyone. But the moon is that which moves us towards comfort and security, which very often is not doing more than you have to. Whereas with the sun, we're willing to do a bit more, go the extra mile, because we've got something deeply essential to present to the world. So on a conceptual level, the sun is the indicator of vitality. And I think if you notice certain horoscopes, if somebody has a Sun Neptune configuration, I've noticed oppositions are really obviously the case. There's the risk of reduction of vitality at times. So a Sun opposite Neptune person might get a bit tired or a bit not wanting to engage with the madding crowd. Um, Vitality is a solar quality, and it can be disrupted by certain aspects within your horoscope. Sun Pluto wouldn't really be able to get going unless it was intense. You know, there would be a force that stopped them getting going unless there was a real reason to move. Now I've got a Sun Pluto aspect, and no, I mean in Taurus, my sun, of course, so nobody can move me at all unless something important is going on. And then, okay, every time I move, I have to bring Pluto with me. So I'm only going to move when it's really important, you know. So you've got that kind of sense of the sun's energy being seriously transformed by its aspects sometimes. And that's why we can't always see it. But if you try and see what the sun is, it's your vitality and therefore your will. Because vitality, if you've got enough vitality, you just do whatever you choose to do. Free will is just obvious. If you lack vitality, then you'll start to wonder whether or not free will is real. But with enough energy, you don't get young kids with their vast amount of energy wondering whether or not they're able or allowed to do something. They get on and do it, just knowing that they can and they're allowed to, until there's a force that remarks upon that. You know, somebody saying, no, you can't do that, it's dangerous or not permitted or whatever. They're stopped. But the vitality of a young child shows itself as willfulness, for example, and we lose that year by year by year. So we're talking about will and vitality and power and desire, and therefore the path that you're going through life. And what Diana referred to is like the soul embodying itself through the solar energy. I can agree with that philosophically and in certain realized beings. When you get to that level where you pretty realize you're awakened and you understand the game and you're not confused by all of the pushings and pullings from other agencies, then you manifest your sun's energy very much more clearly and strongly, and you'll do that by being much more aware of the soul's energy. You know, you can vitalize your sense of personality by tuning into the soul. And those of us who've done meditation a lot, we know that it vitalizes us. We feel energetic just by doing meditation, which is an inward slowing down, but nevertheless it somehow gets us going. And that's partly because we're more closely in alignment in the resonance of our sun. So I think what Diana said was a very worthwhile observation, that the soul and the sun in our being are very much in attunement, which differs from some teachings. You'll often find that somebody is likening the moon energy to the soul. I don't approve of that. I think the moon energy is necessarily, by definition, unconscious. We learned it in utero and the first 6 months of life before we had any thinking capacity. I can't see how that could possibly be described as the soul's energy. It's unconscious. It's the environment within which the soul can flourish. Yeah, sure. Without the moon energy, the soul cannot come into beingness. But in the same way as you plant an acorn, unless you plant it in the earth, you get no tree. But nevertheless, the tree is got that vitalizing will to become. Now, if we see the sun in our horoscope as the will to become, we're starting to sort of get something deeper there. The active energizing principle is that which triggers us to become more than, not what we are, but more than we are. That's an important distinction, I would suggest, because the will to exist is inherent within us, or we wouldn't be breathing, and that meets the environmental pressure. So the will to exist, the sun; environmental pressure, the moon, plus the other planets, but the moon most of all. So the sun expressing itself as the will to exist is made stronger by the moon giving us environmental context, the matrix within which we can exist. So it's not only that the sun, which is kind of like spirit, if we think of spirit as sparking light in all directions, and then the moon comes in and it just contains that, so it's no longer free to move in all directions, but it's got the life force that wants to, and the combination of the life force that wants to be free and the moon that says, just put yourself in context here, that the sun kind of, well, I don't know about that, negotiation, compromise, that's not really me. And the moon saying, yeah, but you'll enjoy it more. And then you settle into the sun's energy in context of the moon. So consciousness begins, and then you have the awakened solar energy. And somehow you have to find a way in life to be free and powerful and doing whatever you want to do within the context of that which on the face of it seems to stop you doing that. But it's not stopping you doing that. It's just saying, no, don't come this way. This is the wrong way. It's like a little polite cul-de-sac sign. No, you don't want to come this way. It's the wrong way. And the moon is trying to give us that kind of energy. And so the sun just tunes in to itself through the eyes of the container, which is essentially the moon, but it can be other things as well. Then it becomes decisive to make choices which are different from knee-jerk, what I did before I'll do again because I liked it kind of behavior, which is much more moonlight than sunlight. So I want to be myself. I wonder what that is. That's much more sun-like. We all really want to be me, but nobody really knows who they are. Like I said, nobody can act their sun in the astrodrama. They don't know what it is. So they're not false exactly, but groping in the dark. But you put the moon in there, and a really good resonant moon. And if you know about synastry and astrology, you know that the sun-moon conjunction is the sweetest of all aspects. I don't know whether you've ever had a friendship or relationship with the sun-moon conjunct going on. It's as sweet as you get. You just never out of step with one another, just flow and act and move, and it's a perfect tango kind of level dance. You don't have to know what's happening next, you just feel it and it works. It's just beautiful. Now if you can internalize that so that you are aware of your soul's urgency and urge to become, and the moon giving you a clue as to what that might be, you're enacting something important of what occurred in the first 3 years or 5 of your life, when you've got this I going on. A mum usually is saying, yes, you be aware of, if you do that, you'll hurt yourself. If you do that, you'll upset people. If you do that, you'll get on in life. That's the guidance that mother very often gives more than father. It's not always the case. Now, when you've got that going, then the moon is shaping the sun's direction, and you have a real balance going on. Now, if we can look at the sun having gone through that process, a strong sun will be noticeable insofar as that person is the center of a circle. And the size of that circle is not important. On the one level, you might be the owner of a dog, and there's nobody that you know in your life apart from the dog, nobody that the dog knows apart from you, but you're the center of that dog's life. And how you are with that dog would be a solar experience for you. That would be how you realize your sun sign. Or you could be the CEO of a very large company indeed. That company would somehow, at least if you sort of set it up right, bring your personality into the world, but your essence personality, not the external part, but the essence self into the world. So this would be, you lose that facility with an institution. An institution is so quickly made grey and entropic, if that's a word, that you lose the capacity to change it. So you got to set it up right at the beginning. If ever you're doing any grouping, like a family, if you want to marry and have kids, you set it up right, or it goes wrong and you can't fix it. If you want a little business or whatever, a garden, you got to put your solar energy into it at the beginning. So the confidence to do that is also a solar principle. So self-confidence is a measure of your alignment with the sun. Therefore, rulers, authority figures, leaders are all representatives of the sun. Not all good guys. The tyrants, strong tyrant energy is an indication of a sun sign, which is powerful. But the more healthy, wholesome representation of this energy is self-realization, creativity, radiance of light, warmth, courage. Yeah, Leo, the sun is Leo, isn't it? And a Leo who's a natural born leader is creative and they're enjoying themselves, and they make wonderful parents. I think Leos are probably the best parents, the parents that I would most have loved to have. Parents that like children, like playing with children, like to awaken their own inner child are the figures we're talking about. Well, the sun within us is a little bit like that. We're playful with it. The bit about yourself that you like the most is the sun. You can make all the mistakes in the world, but you can end up with a smile because, like, oh yeah, I'm always like that. I always make that mistake. Isn't that sweet? Whereas everybody else are not thinking that way at all. You forgive yourself all of these errors because it's just your inner child just stumbling along, finding out, who am I? And of all the questions I get asked in counseling, the unvoiced question that's in every single case is, who am I? And some people just ask that question, who am I? And does anybody here have the ability to explain the question to me? I don't even understand the question. Who am I? What does that mean? I'm James Burgess that lives in Emerald Cottage. What are you talking about? No. Who are you really? I said, well, what's the question here? Are you saying, what would I be if I was entirely ensouled? Is that what we're saying here? Is the who am I question only answered when I am the only remaining incarnation of my soul? Let me explain that a little bit. I think the soul in the astral plane descends into the earth plane by a process called bifurcation. So it just creates 100 or 1,000 different personalities in different space-time coordinates, and they die off at different times, and they return to the astral plane, waiting for the last man standing to come home. But if you are the last man standing, then you're ensouled. You've got the whole of the soul acting through you. And I think that would be in keeping with somebody whose sun is so strong. Like, I'm in command here, even over all of my soul siblings. My 1,000 soul siblings have come to just do bits of work on my behalf at the time when I'm actually ready to do my function, my job. And that requires 100% of me. In other words, I'm in alignment with my soul. And I would think that was the only time would really have true alignment between self and soul, when you're the last man standing, to use that phrase. This is a bit of a subtle teaching, but that's what I use as my model. And so I think the sun sign that we have is really quite an amazing journey, and it's not necessarily realized within one lifetime. You know, I know quite a lot of old people that just aren't significantly different from how they were quite a while ago, you know. And if you don't use the whole of the allotted time to study how to be yourself, well, you're shortchanging yourself, you know. I would say quite confidently that my acceleration of growth within the last 3 years has matched any 3 year period in my life thus far. And I'm just getting ready for the fast bit. You know, the next 5 years is going to be really growthful for me. I know it. I know it. And it's not anything other than I refuse to get old. I just don't see the point. You know, I'm going to rage against the dying of the light. Do you know this poem? Okay. So when we're going into the breakout rooms, what I'm hoping that you're prepared to do, and I want you to discuss, is incidents, moments, periods of your life when push came to shove, that you couldn't cope unless you up the ante a bit. You brought out all of these stops. You know, you got the job done. You know, now that might mean you battled through 5 years of study at a university course that you didn't really like, or you put up with attacking energies from unfriendly people at work, or a husband that was insensitive or whatever. And eventually you said, enough. I will not be seen as a doormat. I'm an amazingly empowered person, and this is who I am, with that kind of tone of voice in your way of presenting that. You know, you've got your own version of that. But I got this tone of voice, and people think, oh, yeah, right. Well, we're listening now, James. You know, well, I wish you'd been listening for a bit longer than, you know. I really don't like having to raise my voice, but if it's necessary, you need to listen. You know, so that's what it's like to have a Sun Mars conjunction square Pluto, who's a bit pissed off about being ignored. Now, you'll have your own way. It would probably be soft and gentle in some cases, but whatever you do to make sure that you're taken seriously, your point is registered, and you're in alignment with the vision you have of your soul and your higher self. So that's what we want to discuss today.